Okay, hi guys. Today we're talking about multiplying and dividing fractions and decimals. And number one, you need to know how to define these. Now, every book has a different definition, but the best bet that we have today is Merriam-Webster for you. So Merriam-Webster defines fraction as a numerical representation indicating the quotient of two numbers and decimal as numbered or preceding by tens. So number two, how do we do these? Well, fractions and decimals work a little differently, which means that we need to split this lesson up into four parts. And the first part is that of multiplying fractions. We've put a rule up on the screen in red, and we're going to show you that by multiplying a over b and c over b, you'll have a product of a times c over b times d. However, if you don't believe us, check a textbook. This textbook shows us the exact same thing. We can see that when b and d does not equal 0, that is what it will be. So here are some examples for you to show you how exactly the mechanics of this work. If we have the first example, that we can see that we need to remember to simplify this, and you can simplify this by taking out or multiplying or dividing things in the numerator and denominator. Look on screen for more clear instructions as to how to simplify. Okay, now the second example is similar, so if you didn't catch something from the first example, look there. Alright, so we also need to remember to check our work. Now the easiest way to check your work is with a calculator. If you don't have a calculator handy, you can always just go back and do your work a second time without looking at your first steps. So here are three other questions that you can do on your own. Pause the screen in order to access those questions. Okay, moving on to part 2. Part 2 is going to be about dividing these fractions. And how do we divide these fractions? Well, there are two ways that we can divide these fractions. Pause the screen if you need more time, again. But the two methods are the inception method and the reciprocal method. Now, these disclaimer that the inception might not be what this method is actually called, but essentially what happens is you get a fraction inside of another fraction, and then you will end up simplifying that inception fraction. So this works because we know that the bar of the fraction essentially just means to divide. If you don't believe me, see that 2 over 1 essentially is just 2 divided by 1 equals 2, and 1 over 2 is just 1 divided by 2, which is 1/2. You can check this with the calculator. So you can see how you prove this inception method. And the inception method isn't really that important, but we need to know a little bit of it because it sets us up for the reciprocal method. Because the inception method is where the reciprocal method is derived from. So if we take the previous example and we apply it here, 2 over 3 divided by 4 over 5th is going to be able to be magically made into 2 over 3 times 5 over 4. And we see this on screen as well. And this is almost magical. It's like insert a mind-blown GIF here because it seems magical, but look, here's how we prove it. Okay, well, 2 over 3 over 4 over 5th, if we write it in the inception method and we go through all the steps of the inception method, we can see why it becomes 2 over 3 over 5 over 4. But for the methods of 6th grade, all we need to know is this reciprocal method. It's the easiest way, and I don't think we actually need to know the inception method for a while. So here are questions for you. Here are 3 questions, and pause the screen again in order to do these questions. Now on to decimals. Third part, multiplying decimals. We already know how to multiply numbers, hopefully. If you don't know how to multiply numbers, we'll put a link in the description and go click on it to see how you multiply numbers. But what happens when you add decimals? Well, essentially, as you see on screen, a decimal really just tells you one thing, the place of the decimal before it and what it means after. So we see here that if you do all of this work, we can use the commutative property of multiplication and get these decimals. And when we have these decimals outside, we can see we just treat the problem as if it were a regular problem without decimals and put the decimal places back in. So we can see that there are going to be 3 total decimal places that are going to be added back in to the product. And so if you put this back in, it's going to look interesting. Yeah, so you put the 3, 0.01 has 2 decimal places, and 0.1 has 1 decimal place. Together you have 3 decimal places, so you count back from the ones place 1, 2, 3 over there, and then 1 becomes the new ones place instead of the original 0. So you can see that by putting these decimal places back in, there are 3 total places after the decimal point, so we count to the left 3 spaces from 0, making the final answer 211.770. Quite interesting. That's how you derive decimals. So we're going to give you a few examples later, and so we know where the ones place is. By the way, all of the questions that we've given you throughout this thing to practice, we're going to have the answer key available in the description below, so don't open the description ahead of time, I guess. So here are some practice questions to show you the mechanics of how this works. Those are the practice problems that you can do. And last but not least, the fourth section is about dividing decimals. So remember, decimals, you can always change them to fractions, and here's a few steps how. And we already know how to divide fractions, so let's try it. We just use the reciprocal method or the inception method, and then we convert it back into a decimal. So here's some more examples, and that's about it. Have a nice day, and Chelsea out. Bye.